Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this episode of Analysis with myself, Chris Banbury. This evening we'll be looking at the Palestine ceasefire talks and the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And so we turn our attention to the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, a situation that has escalated dramatically over the past several months. The conflict, which began with a devastating attack in southern Israel by Hamas in October the 7th, has led to significant military actions by Israel in Gaza. The death toll has been heavy, with over 40,000 people being killed and a severe humanitarian crisis unfolding. The political situation remains tense, with both sides entrenched in their positions. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has reiterated his commitment to Israel's security, while Hamas continues to resist, leading to a prolonged and bloody conflict. Efforts to broker a ceasefire have been ongoing, with the United Nations US Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently visiting the region and Israel. Israel has accepted an American bridging proposal for a ceasefire, but that arrangement now hinges on Hamas's response. Talks are set to continue in Cairo, with hopes that a deal can be reached to halt the violence and secure the release of the hostages. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire. The United Nations has described conditions as appalling, with millions living in squalid conditions and facing severe shortages of food, water and medical supplies. The international community has called for urgent humanitarian pauses to allow aid to reach those in need. We're now going to watch a short report from Gaza on that dreadful humanitarian situation.
A UN convoy has delivered a much-needed but insufficient amount of fuel to Gaza City, aimed at sustaining critical services such as bakeries and health facilities. The United Nations, in a recent update on social media platform X, acknowledged the arrival of this fuel but emphasized that it falls far from enough to address the urgent needs of the region. The UN highlighted that the delivery is only a small step in the face of a worsening humanitarian crisis, urging for a ceasefire and sustained humanitarian access to effectively save lives in Gaza. Photographs released by the UN depict the extensive damage in Gaza City, including destroyed buildings and accumulated waste, a consequence of intense Israeli bombardment that began in October of the previous year. With Gaza's electricity cut off since October, critical services have been heavily dependent on fuel to power generators. The recent fuel delivery, while crucial, highlights a dire need for comprehensive humanitarian solution to alleviate the severe shortages and support the city's recovery efforts.
We're now joined by Professor Kamal Hawash. Professor Hawash is an academic teaching civil engineering at the University of Birmingham. He's a British Palestinian. Welcome, Professor Hawash. Can I start by asking, the narrative we get in the established media here in Britain, the United States and elsewhere, is that the talks breaking down consistently, that has been the fault of Hamas. Is that true or is it false?
You introduced this just before the video by saying that effectively the Americans have convinced Israel to accept this new deal and that it's now Hamas that's refusing. In fact, this is a deal written by Israel. It isn't written by the United States, because what the record has been over the last few months, that the partners that are trying to bring the two sides together come up with a deal. It looks as if it might be acceptable to both sides. Then Netanyahu throws in more conditions, as he has done this time, and trying to lay the blame at Hamas's door so that he can continue to kill, maim, and destroy. And this time is no different. So Blinken went across and says, basically, now the ball is in Hamas's court. No, it's not, because Israel has changed the rules of the game. It wants to remain in two key areas. One, basically the southern border between Palestine, between Gaza and Egypt, and it wants to remain in the middle of Gaza. It wants to control who can go back to the north. It wants to control all access for humanitarian aid. And it wants to return, after the hostages are freed, to return to attack Gaza. And therefore, the ball is now in Hamas's court to say, no, we will not accept this, because they have made it clear that in order for there to be a ceasefire, it has to be a permanent ceasefire, and Israel must leave the whole of Gaza and go back to the situation as it was on the 6th of October. And of course, that there should be negotiations for a proper peace deal for the future between Palestine and Israel. So I don't think it's accurate to say it's Hamas that is obstructing the negotiations. It is very much Netanyahu against the advice of his security people as well.
Well, let's just look at Israel, because for many people here, it would have, you would think that the return of the hostages and the corpses of the hostages would be the crucial issue for Israel. It doesn't seem to be the crucial issue for Benjamin Netanyahu, does it?
Well, no. I mean, he's made it clear that the first objective is the destruction of Hamas, then the release of the hostages. And therefore, if you take it even in the sequence that he has presented, he hasn't destroyed Hamas. And even his own military people don't think it's possible to completely destroy Hamas. They certainly can't destroy it as an ideology, i.e., a people under occupation that want to get rid of that occupation. So what you have is the families of the hostages uh, demonstrating, trying to meet Netanyahu, the defense minister, etc., to push for the release of the hostages as the primary objective. But it isn't the primary objective for this extremist fascist government in Israel, which includes people like Ben Gavir and Smotrich, both of whom want to continue to punish the Palestinians wherever they are, whether in Gaza or the West Bank, or even in prisons, and that they want to expand the settlements and continue to destroy Palestinian homes. So you need to look at the whole situation, which is certainly not geared towards the release of the hostages. But it's important to remember that back in, I believe it was November, there was a ceasefire and hostages were released. So it's really the blood of the Israeli hostages is on the hands of Netanyahu.
Some viewers might blanch when you describe the Israeli government as fascist, but the people you mentioned, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, actually have expressed admiration for fascism. I mean, it's not just something you've invented, is it?
No, not at all. This is, and indeed, Ben Gvir himself was charged with terrorism. I mean, we're talking about such extremist people. It's difficult to get to any more extreme than that. But even the supposed, if you like, less extreme people, like the Minister of Defense, I would remind viewers that he called the Palestinians human animals in his first press conference, which made it, if you like, well, they're animals, so killing them is no big deal. When in fact, they are not only human beings, but they are no higher or lower in status than Israeli Jews.
Now, just turning back to what you said, I mean, the Israeli Defense Force has said that it's impossible to destroy Hamas. I think what it's really saying is we're not just talking about a military force here. We're talking about a social movement. We're talking about a semi-state, effectively, in Gaza prior to the 7th of October. Rather like Hezbollah in Lebanon as well, incidentally. And it's almost impossible to destroy such an entity.
It is. I mean, both Hamas and Israel know that a lot of Hamas leadership and fighters actually live in the tunnels, which Israel hasn't been able to completely destroy, and that in fact there's a political wing, an administrative wing to Hamas. So the administrative wing is trying the city councils, if you like, is trying to continue to provide some services like clearing the roads. I mean, these pictures you're showing now are of areas that it's really the municipality that has helped to create the dirt road that we see, and as was in the United Nations tour that you showed earlier as well. So there are two sides to this: one, the military side, and the whether Israel is able to destroy Hamas is not clear. I saw in one of the reports on the by Hamas in Al Jazeera on a particular attack they made on Israeli soldiers, that one of the people who did the attack says, I've been recruited in 2024. In other words, they are rebuilding. And of course, that's because people in Gaza see who is really destroying them and their future and the cities, towns, and villages, and it is Israel. And they're now becoming recruits for Hamas and the other Palestinian factions because they feel that their eyes should be focused on the real criminal here, the real terrorist entity, which is Israel.
Now, just turning to the United States, I mean, today President Joe Biden said of the demonstrators outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, he said they have a point. Now, if they have a point, why is the United States not insisting on a ceasefire? Why is it not saying it will cut off weapon supplies to Israel to enforce that? Why?
Absolutely. I was going to add this point you've just made. It's not just about requiring a ceasefire. The arms that are being supplied, the most deadly, the most devastating weapons you can think of. That I saw a report yesterday of people who were trying to bury 19 people who had died, and they said it almost evaporated. This is not self-defense. This is absolutely an attempt to wipe out the Palestinian presence in Gaza bit by bit, day by day. Every morning, we get up to hear that another 50, 100, 200 Palestinians have been killed. So there's that. There's the political assistance. It's not just about the military. It's the political assistance in the United Nations. Surely the Security Council should have demanded a proper ceasefire, but you get the Americans at best abstaining, but at worst vetoing anything. And they're putting pressure on the International Criminal Court not to summon Netanyahu and Gallant to The Hague. They're also putting pressure on the International Court of Justice to not to pursue the investigation into the genocide that Israel is carrying it out. America is completely, it's not just complicit, it is a partner in the genocide that is happening in Gaza. So what tends to happen, what is happening at the moment is, particularly in Chicago, where this convention is happening, there's a high percentage of an Arab American population who are out on the streets at the moment demonstrating against the government, but also within the Democratic Party itself, there's a rising number of people who cannot take any more of Israel's lies and its criminality. So to just say they have a point, they have more than a point. He is the person who can tell Netanyahu to stop, and he should make a point of that to Netanyahu, not talk about those people protesting making a point.
We're just going to get this report from Mohammed Takir, a surgeon who's been working in Gaza, talking about the situation there. Just give me a couple of seconds here.
I witnessed in Gaza is nothing short of outright genocide. I saw the killing and the maiming of women and children and innocent men. There were times where I really looked up to the sky and I thought, when will this end? Because it seemed like a tsunami over and over and over. And there were times where we had to choose between which children lived and which children died. It hasn't ended. In fact, the onslaught on Deir al-Balah, which is a city in the central zone of Gaza, has just begun. And there are millions of people there. And if we don't act with all our might to pressurize all those who are responsible, then there will be an even bigger massacre unfolding. I say nothing short of La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. We put our trust in Allah, and then we put our trust in one another. And inshallah, soon we will see a free Palestine, where its people are treated with dignity, and its people are safe and secure, and they are allowed to flourish. I thank you all for coming out today. It means a lot to me, but I am just a servant. Allah chose me in some capacity to serve. It felt like really what I was doing was nothing more than putting a plaster on a huge crack. But it's something, I suppose. But the struggle is here. It's with those who have the power, and that's where we must act next. So thank you again. Inshallah, we can make a difference.
Professor Hawash, I mean, you've got to admire the bravery of that surgeon speaking on his return to Heathrow Airport. But when he says that this is applying a sticking plaster to an open wound, he's right, isn't he? I mean, the Israelis are blocking real humanitarian aid. The aid is necessarily coming into Gaza, and that is a siege of the civilian population, which is a crime under international law. But it's creating a genocide. There is no other word to describe it.
It's deliberate. Every single action that is being taken in Gaza is deliberate. The Israeli government gave basically carte blanche for its soldiers to do whatever they like. We've seen so many videos on TikTok and other platforms where an Israeli soldier puts lots of explosives in a building and says, "It's my daughter's birthday today," or words to similar things, and my present to her is this, and he just blows the building up. But it's on the health sector, and you heard the surgeon talk about child after child. He wasn't saying that he was having to decide which fighter lives or dies. He was talking about children. And you would have thought that particularly the British government here, and I used to say this when Sunak was in charge, who had two daughters, when he puts them to bed, they're warm. When Palestinian mothers put their children, lay them to rest, they are stone cold because they have been killed by this criminal entity. And it is a criminal entity. It is a state that is conducting a terrorist operation. And I'll explain why I say terrorist operation by a terrorist state, because the definition of terrorism is the use of violence to achieve political means. And that's exactly what Israel is doing. It's using the utmost violence to achieve its political objective of actually displacing the Palestinians out of Gaza, because that is ultimately what Israel wants to do. At the moment, there are around 7 million Jewish Israelis and 7 million Palestinians in the Holy Land. If they can get rid of the Palestinians in Gaza, it will become 7 million Jews versus 5 million Palestinians. Then they turn their attention, as they are slowly, to the West Bank, get rid of more, and that reinstates the demographic equation that they favor, which is to have many more Jewish Israelis on the land than they have Palestinians. It is appalling what is happening, and the fact that even our Foreign Minister David Lammy was in Israel, Palestine, a couple of days ago with his French counterpart. To do what? He came away with his hands empty. He didn't get any move from the Israeli government. But more shamefully, he hasn't come back and said, we cannot continue to have normal relations as Britain with a state which is accused of genocide, a state which is accused of apartheid, and a state that has killed at least 40,000 people, including something like 17,000 children. There should be no relations between Britain and Israel. If this is the kind of ally that Britain wants to have in the world, God help us. They should have nothing to do with this criminal entity.
Now, let's just turn back to Israel, because for decades, Israel has believed in what it calls the Iron Wall, Netanyahu in particular. That means that it has to have sufficient military force to intimidate anyone from thinking about attacking Israel. That's been Israeli policy really since 1948. It rests on invincibility. Today, Israel does not look invincible. As you mentioned, Netanyahu said we're going to annihilate Hamas. They have failed after almost 9 months. They have not annihilated Hamas. Israel is looking weaker than any time I can remember in my lifetime.
Well, first of all, yes, they talk about deterrence. They used to say that the Israeli army isn't just the most moral army in the world, which is absolutely not true, particularly following what they've been doing in prisons, raping Palestinian men unashamedly. In their case, I'm actually wanting to make it a policy that it's okay, but at the same time, Israel is has used this deterrence in the past. So, for example, in Lebanon in 2006, they hit Lebanon so hard that they thought there would never be any attack from Lebanon on Israel, but Israel continued to occupy Lebanese territory, and now we have Hezbollah. Uh, they, uh, 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 they think that they can do anything and that they can bring security to Israeli civilians. But let's look at the evidence at the moment. So uh, there's fighting in Gaza. There's fighting in the West Bank. We had a bomb explode in Tel Aviv only a couple of days ago. The Israeli citizens have been moved away from the south since the 7th of October, and those in the northern Galilee have also had to move south. In other words, nobody is feeling secure in Israel, and that is despite the military might that Israel has. Which brings us to the United States. If it wasn't for the United States, Israel would be defeated because it is only through that, not only military support, political support, financial support, but also that America puts pressure even on the EU and the UK to toe the line on the way that they support Israel, and indeed moving towards bringing some Arab countries into the equation on the side of Israel rather than on the side of the Palestinians. We hear, I heard a figure of somewhere between 500,000 to a million Israelis that have left because of the situation, not just this year, but over the past few years, the deteriorating situation. So this country, which claims to be a safe haven for Jews, is certainly not a safe haven for Jews. They are better off where they are in various countries where they are full citizens, including the UK, than making that move to go and first of all steal more Palestinian land, but also to put their lives at risk.
And the other point is that Israel, I mean, despite that, Israel internationally has never been so more isolated, and public opinion in the United Kingdom, it changed a long time ago, but in the United States, has shifted significantly on the whole issue of support for Palestine.
Absolutely. People are beginning to see it. I have seen so many videos by Americans, particularly Jewish Americans, young Jewish Americans, who have been saying words to the effect, I grew up in a Zionist family home, and I didn't know anything about the Palestinians except bad things. I am now ashamed of my past supporting Israel, and I'm now switched completely to supporting Palestine. Some of them, break into tears while saying this because they really feel that this is not an entity that they should support. So, yes, support for the Palestinians is rising, support for Israel is declining, and it is being seen as a pariah state. And after all, remember, Israel isn't just attacking Gaza and Lebanon and the West Bank. It is attacking Iraq. It is attacking Syria. It is attacking Yemen, and has also, of course, assassinated the head of Hamas in Iran. So it's attacking Iran. So it is absolutely, in my view, the biggest source of instability in the Middle East. And the quicker the Israeli public realize that, rein their government in, the more chance there is that it will survive. Because the way that it is heading, being seen as a pariah state, losing support left, right, and center, and only being kept, if you like, alive by America, the time will come when the balance will shift much more in favor of the Palestinians.
Professor Kamal Hawash, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to end by a look at skin diseases affecting children in Gaza.
Like many other children in Gaza, 3-year-old Yasmin al-Shambari is ravaged by skin disease. There's little chance of relief for her. The 10-month war between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas has left Gaza with no clean water, streets running with sewage, and a shortage of aid and medicine. Tiny insects flit around the little girl's face, while piles of garbage rot in the summer heat outside the burnt-out school in which she and her father Ahmed are taking shelter in Jabalia refugee camp in the north. They're displaced like most people in Gaza.
We really suffer a lot from skin diseases in the school. The schools, first of all, are dilapidated and there's no cleanliness. As you can see, the school is overcrowded and not every child is like the other. Each child is different, even from different areas. For example, my daughter Yasmin is sensitive to diseases. The diseases she has on her face have been there for almost 10 days now.
Ammar al-Masharawi, 2.5 years old, has a fiery rash all over his face and body. His father Ahmed is seeking treatment for him in Kamal Adwan Hospital. They've tried others to no avail.
The reason is the lack of food and medicine, a shortage of everything. We are suffering from everything. There is no medicine or food for the children. These children were recently weaned and they can't find eggs, bananas, or anything good to support them. There is no milk, semolina, or anything at all. We adults manage somehow, but the children, God help them.
Skin diseases are not the only illnesses stalking children in one of the most densely populated places on Earth. The World Health Organization has sounded the alarm that hepatitis A and polio are spreading among children. It blamed a chronic scarcity of water and trash and sewage in the streets, all compounded by people living crowded into shelters where they have to stand in line for hours to use the toilets. Dr. Wissam As-Sakani.
The overcrowding of citizens in shelters has also contributed to the rapid spread of skin diseases. Yesterday, we were talking about hepatitis, and today we are talking about contagious skin diseases. Every day there are new diseases spreading among children, such as vitiligo, tinea, psoriasis, and scabies.
That was a report from in Gaza on the skin diseases affecting children as a consequence of a lack of food, water and healthcare. And on that dreadful note, we're going to end this episode of Analysis looking at the Palestinian ceasefire talks and the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Thank you for joining us. From myself, Chris Banbury, good evening.